Early January, 1945, found Dwight Eisenhower burdened by command maps that felt secondary to political fractures, threatening the Allied war effort itself. Victory in Europe seemed near, yet unity felt brittle, strained by personalities, press statements, and wounded pride. Eisenhower understood that alliance cohesion, not battlefield tactics, now determined whether momentum survived. Only weeks earlier, the Ardennes counteroffensive had nearly torn open the Western Front, forcing emergency decisions that placed American armies under British command. Those measures saved ground, yet planted resentment. Eisenhower knew temporary necessity often hardened into expectation, especially when reputations and national narratives collided under public scrutiny globally today. Bernard Montgomery's January press conference transformed private irritation into public crisis, questioning American leadership while elevating British direction during the Bulge. Eisenhower watched reaction ripple instantly across Washington and frontline camps. He recognized morale as strategic terrain, and words spoken carelessly could wound deeper than German artillery ever managed before. American generals reacted with fury, not theatrics, feeling the sacrifices of their soldiers publicly diminished by an ally seeking narrative advantage. Eisenhower fielded calls, letters, and implied ultimatums within hours. He understood command authority depended on trust, and trust was evaporating faster than winter fog along the Meuse front lines. Montgomery, meanwhile, believed his argument rested on operational logic, not insult, emphasizing coordination during chaos and geographic necessity. Eisenhower saw a different reality forming, one where logic mattered less than perception. In coalition warfare, perception shaped obedience, and obedience sustained armies moving under shared command across contested European fronts relentlessly. Compounding pressure. Omar Bradley warned privately that American command legitimacy was collapsing under British overreach. Resignation threats were not emotional posturing but calculated signals. Eisenhower listened carefully, recognizing that losing Bradley meant unraveling the American command structure that anchored the entire Western advance during winter operations in Germany alone there. George Patton's reaction carried equal weight, sharpened by battlefield success and personal rivalry with Montgomery. His willingness to resign escalated stakes dramatically. Eisenhower knew Patton symbolized offensive momentum, and losing him risked slowing the advance when speed promised a shorter, cheaper end to war for exhausted Allied nations worldwide now. Eisenhower occupied a lonely middle ground, balancing national pride against strategic necessity. He could not humiliate Britain without weakening unity, nor indulge Montgomery without alienating Americans. The crisis demanded compromise without victory, a solution that preserved cooperation while satisfying almost nobody involved during decisive winter campaigning across Europe then there. Churchill watched anxiously from London, aware British influence depended on maintaining American goodwill. He understood Montgomery's brilliance and flaws intimately. Eisenhower sensed Churchill would support restraint, not escalation, because alliance survival outweighed individual commanders, even famous ones. At this stage of the war in Europe entirely now, then there globally. Maps on Eisenhower's desk showed arrows and bridges, yet his true battlefield lay within relationships. Decisions made in January would echo beyond the Rhine. He weighed egos like divisions, calculating which concessions preserved momentum without surrendering. American authority within the coalition during final European offensives of war ahead there then. The urgency was amplified by time, as winter operations demanded clarity before spring offensives resumed. Eisenhower knew delay favored discord. Every day unresolved deepened suspicion between staffs. Risking paralysis at the moment, Allied armies prepared to exploit German weakness decisively across collapsing fronts in West Germany rapidly there then now. Thus January opened not with celebration but tension, as Eisenhower prepared to arbitrate egos rather than battles. His coming choice would redefine Allied command, strip Montgomery of vast American strength, and quietly ensure the war ended united, not victorious alone despite lingering bitterness everywhere afterward among commanders and nations worldwide. The press conference unfolded in early January 1945, inside a modest room that suddenly became an alliance fault line. Montgomery spoke confidently, calmly, framing the Battle of the Bulge as a crisis he personally stabilized. Eisenhower immediately sensed danger, because words spoken publicly could not be recalled once released into wartime memory forever. Montgomery described American forces as disorganized, retreating, and confused before British coordination restored coherence. He likely intended professional explanation, yet his tone implied rescue rather than cooperation. Eisenhower understood how such phrasing would resonate across American units who had fought, frozen, and died holding shattered Ardennes roads through December misery. News traveled instantly through headquarters radios and newspaper dispatches, amplifying resentment before context could soften interpretation. Eisenhower watched reports arrive describing American anger rising from corps commanders down to rifle companies. He knew soldiers tolerated hardship, but rarely tolerated public dismissal of their sacrifice by Allied commanders seeking recognition. For American generals, Montgomery's remarks crossed an unforgivable boundary, shifting from operational explanation into perceived insult. Bradley interpreted the statements as a direct attack on American leadership credibility. Eisenhower listened as anger sharpened into ultimatums, realizing the crisis now threatened command cohesion rather than public relations alone during ongoing winter operations. Patton's reaction was volcanic, fueled by pride and battlefield performance during Bastogne relief. He viewed Montgomery's claims as theft of American blood-earned victories. Eisenhower recognized Patton's fury as both personal and symbolic, reflecting broader sentiment among aggressive American commanders who rejected British paternalism outright under any justification during wartime coalition leadership. Among enlisted soldiers, the reaction was quieter yet deeper, expressed through bitter jokes and letters home. Eisenhower read morale reports, noting wounded pride among veterans who had survived encirclement. Words spoken in comfort struck men who remembered frozen foxholes and relentless artillery, making Montgomery's explanation feel detached from lived reality of combat. The American press seized the story eagerly, framing it as British arrogance diminishing American heroism. Headlines hardened perceptions before diplomatic corrections could intervene. Eisenhower knew domestic opinion mattered, as political support sustained the war effort. He worried that unchecked narrative damage might undermine public confidence in Allied leadership unity at a critical moment. Montgomery seemed initially unaware of the inferno he ignited, interpreting criticism as overreaction. Eisenhower understood this disconnect, recognizing Montgomery's inability to read emotional landscapes beyond operational charts. In coalition warfare, emotional intelligence mattered as much as strategy, because wounded allies fought less willingly under shared command structures thereafter. Behind closed doors, Eisenhower fielded increasingly blunt messages from Washington, urging decisive action to protect American prestige. He resisted impulsive punishment, knowing that public humiliation of Montgomery could fracture British support. Yet he also realized inaction risked mass resignation threats becoming irreversible fractures within the American command hierarchy across the European theater. Montgomery's chief of staff eventually grasped severity and flew urgently to Eisenhower's headquarters. There he learned relief orders were drafted, a sobering revelation that shocked the British camp. Eisenhower had reached the brink, prepared to sacrifice a famed commander to preserve alliance integrity if no correction emerged quickly enough. The forced apology that followed prevented immediate dismissal, yet failed to heal trust. Eisenhower recognized apologies without belief rarely repair damage. The press conference lingered like shrapnel embedded in alliance flesh, causing pain with every movement. The crisis had shifted from words to power, setting the stage for consequential command decisions ahead. Thus, Section 2 of the crisis ended not with resolution but escalation, as Montgomery's statements reshaped alliance politics overnight. Eisenhower now faced an unavoidable reckoning where authority, pride, and national honor collided. The war against Germany continued, yet an internal battle for unity now demanded his full attention and judgment. During the Ardennes crisis, Eisenhower faced a shattered front, split communications, and rapidly advancing German forces threatening encirclement. Geography forced his hand because Montgomery's headquarters lay closest to the northern shoulder. To stabilize collapsing coordination, Eisenhower temporarily transferred operational control of 1st Army and 9th Army northward as winter chaos overwhelmed existing American command boundaries. Operational necessity, not admiration, defined Eisenhower's decision, a distinction often lost in later controversy. German penetration had split Bradley's command, leaving northern armies isolated from their army group. Montgomery possessed intact staff, communications, and proximity. Temporarily subordinating American formations promised immediate unity of effort until the crisis passed, under extreme winter combat pressure conditions. Eisenhower announced the arrangement carefully, emphasizing its temporary nature to soothe American pride. He framed the transfer as a geographic convenience, not a judgment on competence. Privately, he reassured Bradley the armies would return once lines reconnected. The decision bought time, yet planted resentment that would soon demand reckoning within alliance command politics rapidly. For Montgomery, the transfer appeared as vindication, confirming long-held beliefs about centralized control. 2 American armies under his direction transformed his northern front into a formidable mass. He viewed the authority as proof of strategic correctness, rather than emergency expedient. This interpretation widened the gulf between British confidence and American suspicion. Bradley accepted the decision outwardly, suppressing anger for alliance stability. Internally, he felt stripped of responsibility for forces he had trained since Normandy. His authority reduced overnight. He watched British command issue orders to American units. Eisenhower sensed Bradley's patience thinning, understanding loyalty had limits when dignity felt compromised by temporary necessity alone. American corps commanders reacted with confusion, suddenly reporting through unfamiliar channels. Differences in doctrine, tempo, and communication style surfaced immediately. Montgomery's deliberate methods contrasted sharply with American improvisation developed under pressure. Eisenhower monitored reports anxiously, knowing friction during active combat could magnify casualties and erode trust between Allied formations under winter stress conditions. Despite tension, the arrangement achieved its immediate purpose, halting German momentum in the north. Coordinated defense solidified lines, buying critical days for American reorganization. Eisenhower viewed this as confirmation of his gamble's necessity. Yet he never mistook success for endorsement, marking the transfer as a temporary bridge, not permanent command. Montgomery, however, began planning as though authority might extend beyond crisis management. He integrated American strength into his broader northern offensive vision. This alarmed Eisenhower, who sensed strategic overreach. Temporary power risked becoming precedent, and precedent threatened alliance balance, especially with American commanders already questioning British intentions amid ongoing winter operations pressures. Within Supreme Headquarters, staff officers debated timelines for restoring American command. Eisenhower resisted public discussion, preferring quiet resolution once the front stabilized. He understood symbolism mattered, timing mattered, and humiliation must be avoided. Returning armies too late would imply concession. Too early would risk renewed chaos along fragile lines under combat strain. Churchill observed the situation carefully, recognizing American sensitivity after Bulge's losses. British influence depended upon American goodwill, not press statements. Montgomery's temporary authority risked appearing like permanent dominance. Eisenhower quietly assured London that balance would return, even as he prepared to enforce limits once German pressure fully receded across coalition command relationships. Thus Montgomery's control of 2 American armies emerged from crisis mathematics, not political favor. It was born from collapsing fronts, frozen roads, and urgent necessity. Eisenhower never intended permanence. Yet the temporary arrangement altered perceptions, encouraging Montgomery's ambitions while hardening American resolve to reclaim command authority swiftly when opportunity allowed. The seeds of the coming confrontation were sown during this uneasy compromise. Montgomery believed success justified extension. Americans believed patience was already exhausted. Eisenhower stood between interpretations, measuring consequences. Temporary power had stabilized the front, but it also ensured the next decision would be far more explosive than the last. The Battle of the Bulge ended militarily before it ended politically because victory did not silence wounded pride. American soldiers counted frozen graves while commanders counted reputations. Into this fragile aftermath stepped claims, interpretations, and public narratives. Credit became currency, contempt became subtext, and alliance unity faced its most dangerous test since Normandy. Montgomery's January press conference transformed battlefield coordination into political provocation. His words suggested British intervention rescued faltering Americans, simplifying chaos into hierarchy. To exhausted American units, this felt like theft. They had held lines, counterattacked, and died in forests. Hearing their struggle reframed as British salvation ignited fury across ranks and headquarters alike. American newspapers amplified the insult immediately, translating British phrasing into perceived arrogance. Headlines accused Montgomery of rewriting history, erasing American sacrifice. Veterans organizations demanded explanations, letters flooded Washington, and congressional murmurs grew restless. Eisenhower watched public opinion harden, understanding morale at home mattered almost as much as cohesion at the front. For frontline soldiers, Montgomery's comments cut deeper than strategy disputes. Men who survived Bastogne, Elsinburn Ridge, and Stoumont heard their endurance questioned indirectly. They had not felt saved, only surrounded, cold and determined. The suggestion they required British correction struck as condescension, reopening wounds barely closed by survival itself. Bradley interpreted the press conference as betrayal rather than miscommunication. He had accepted temporary subordination for operational necessity, trusting alliance discretion. Public credit-seeking shattered that trust. To Bradley, Montgomery violated an unspoken code, exploiting crisis command for personal vindication after Market Garden. The issue ceased being military, becoming personal, professional, and political simultaneously. Patton's reaction was more volcanic, his language sharper and less diplomatic. Having pivoted Third Army through snow to relieve Bastogne, he viewed Montgomery's narrative as theft of American audacity. For Patton, credit equaled honor, and honor justified risk. He interpreted Montgomery's words as an attack on American martial identity itself. British leadership underestimated American sensitivity to recognition, misreading cultural differences. Montgomery believed results spoke louder than feelings, yet ignored that alliances survive on mutual respect. Churchill recognized danger quickly, sensing headlines eroding trust built through shared blood. Eisenhower now faced not strategy, but emotional mathematics threatening cohesion at the highest levels. Within Supreme Headquarters, staff officers argued damage control rather than planning. Eisenhower's inbox filled with complaints, resignation threats, and diplomatic cables. The Bulge had unified armies under fire, but peace restored old rivalries. Credit allocation, once ceremonial, became explosive because it symbolized future authority, respect, and historical memory. Montgomery's insistence that he merely stated facts failed to soothe tensions. Facts without empathy sharpened divisions. Eisenhower knew intent mattered less than perception. Allies required reassurance, not correction. By framing success as British organization correcting American disorder, Montgomery inadvertently politicized the battle, transforming shared defense into contested legacy. The controversy exposed deeper fissures about command philosophy and national prestige. Americans favored aggressive recovery narratives, celebrating initiative under pressure. Montgomery favored structured control narratives, emphasizing order. These worldviews collided publicly at the worst possible moment when unity was needed for the final push into Germany. Eisenhower grasped the stakes immediately, understanding silence equaled endorsement. He moved swiftly to demand clarification and apology, not to punish pride, but to preserve alliance equilibrium. The Bulge had nearly broken the front, now words threatened to break trust. Leadership required extinguishing ego before it ignited mutiny. Thus the Bulge became political because victory arrived unevenly, leaving space for interpretation. Who saved whom mattered less than who claimed it. In that vacuum, credit transformed into weaponry. Eisenhower now faced a new battlefield, where maps were reputations, and missteps could fracture the alliance permanently. Omar Bradley reached his limit quietly, yet with unmistakable resolve, after weeks of restraint. He had endured temporary subordination for battlefield necessity, swallowing pride for unity. Montgomery's demands changed everything. Bradley believed command meant responsibility matched with authority, and authority without armies reduced leadership to theater rather than meaningful wartime direction. Bradley's position was rooted in professional identity, not wounded vanity. He commanded American armies since Normandy, sharing risk, failure, and recovery. Removing those forces permanently stripped purpose from his role. An army group commander without armies became ceremonial, a facade incompatible with American command culture or personal honor forged under fire. In conversations with Eisenhower, Bradley spoke plainly, abandoning diplomatic cushioning. He would not accept a structure relegating him to observer while Montgomery wielded American strength. Such an arrangement, he argued, subordinated American strategy to British ambition. Bradley insisted this violated understandings established when the alliance balanced sovereignty with cooperation. Bradley's threat to resign shocked Eisenhower because it was credible. Unlike impulsive protests, Bradley's words reflected deep calculation. He understood resignation would fracture command, but remaining under humiliation risked worse consequences. Loyalty, he believed, required boundaries. Without them, unity decayed into submission masked as cooperation. Other American generals quietly aligned with Bradley's stance, reinforcing its gravity. They feared precedent more than immediate discomfort. If Montgomery retained permanent command, future American operations risked British direction without accountability. Bradley became spokesperson for a broader anxiety, channeling institutional concern through personal resolve and professional legitimacy. Bradley emphasized that the temporary bulge arrangement succeeded precisely because it was temporary. Crisis justified flexibility, not permanence. Continuing it after stabilization distorted intent. Eisenhower listened carefully, recognizing Bradley's logic mirrored alliance principles. Shared victory required mutual consent, not unilateral extension of authority gained during emergency. Patton's support strengthened Bradley's hand, though delivered with sharper rhetoric. Patton framed the issue as honor, arguing American blood purchased autonomy. Bradley framed it as structure, arguing effectiveness required clear ownership. Together, they presented Eisenhower a united front, blending emotional intensity with sober institutional warning. Eisenhower weighed the consequences carefully, understanding Bradley's resignation could cascade. Army group commanders might follow, destabilizing entire fronts. Replacing them mid-campaign was impossible. Bradley's line therefore represented more than personal defiance. It was an alarm bell warning of systemic collapse if grievances remained unaddressed. Bradley also feared historical distortion, where command equaled credit in memory. If Montgomery led American armies to victory, narratives would follow authority. Bradley wanted history to reflect shared sacrifice accurately. He understood wars end twice, once on battlefields, then again in books shaping national remembrance. Eisenhower recognized Bradley's moral authority stemmed from restraint exercised earlier. Bradley had accepted slights silently, prioritizing cohesion. Drawing the line now signaled extraordinary circumstances. This was not insubordination, but preservation. Eisenhower saw a commander protecting the integrity of his institution, not undermining alliance unity. The confrontation clarified choices Eisenhower tried to avoid. Keeping Montgomery satisfied risked losing American leadership entirely. Keeping Bradley loyal required limiting British ambition. Bradley's line forced decision, collapsing ambiguity. Command without armies, he insisted, was nothing, and Eisenhower now had to decide which nothing he could afford. Thus Bradley transformed private frustration into strategic leverage, compelling resolution. His stand redefined alliance boundaries without severing them. By insisting authority align with responsibility, he defended American command principles, while leaving room for compromise. Eisenhower would soon act, guided by the clarity Bradley's refusal finally imposed. George Patton reacted to Montgomery's demand with volcanic clarity, transforming private outrage into explicit threat. For him, resignation was not drama but leverage. He believed tolerance had expired. American soldiers had fought, maneuvered, and bled independently. To remain silent now meant accepting permanent subordination to a commander he considered cautious, political, and undeserving. Patton framed his ultimatum as moral necessity rather than personal grievance. He told Bradley his conscience would not permit continued service under such arrangements. The issue, he insisted, was not rank but respect. American blood purchased operational autonomy, and any command denying that reality betrayed soldiers still fighting in frozen forests. Unlike Bradley's measured restraint, Patton's language was blunt, sharpened by anger and pride. He described Montgomery as an egomaniac exploiting crisis for reputation. The words carried risk, yet Eisenhower understood their sincerity. Patton rarely postured about resignation. When he spoke of leaving, he meant institutional rupture rather than theatrical protest. Patton's recent actions amplified his credibility dramatically. Third Army's rapid pivot relieved Bastogne, a maneuver studied already as operational genius. He had turned divisions 90 degrees in blizzards, restoring momentum when collapse loomed. Such achievements gave Patton moral capital, making his ultimatum impossible for Eisenhower to dismiss lightly. Patton argued resignation was preferable to complicity. Remaining under Montgomery's permanent authority meant enabling British narratives diminishing American contribution. He refused to watch American armies serve as instruments for another nation's prestige. For Patton, history mattered deeply. Wars ended, but reputations endured, shaping national memory long after gunfire ceased. The threat unsettled Eisenhower profoundly because Patton symbolized aggressive American warfare. Losing him risked more than manpower, it risked momentum. Patton's army drove relentlessly, exploiting opportunities others hesitated to seize. Removing him mid-campaign could stall advances and embolden German resistance when speed remained decisive. Patton's ultimatum also emboldened others quietly dissatisfied. Officers who admired his audacity saw his stance as permission to resist further concessions. Eisenhower sensed cohesion fraying. One resignation might be survivable. Multiple resignations would be catastrophic, shattering confidence across commands and signaling alliance failure to enemy intelligence. Eisenhower weighed Patton's volatility against his value carefully. Patton required management, but he delivered results unmatched by peers. Allowing him to resign over command politics seemed absurdly wasteful. Yet ignoring his warning risked mutiny in spirit if not form, with commanders obeying orders reluctantly rather than wholeheartedly. Patton insisted the issue transcended personalities. He argued structural clarity preserved unity better than forced compromise. Ambiguity bred resentment. If Montgomery commanded Americans permanently, lines must be explicit. Otherwise, American generals became symbolic, reduced to administrators while strategic credit accrued elsewhere without accountability. The ultimatum forced Eisenhower to confront alliance asymmetry honestly. British forces were exhausted. American forces were ascendant. Patton voiced what many felt but feared saying. Power realities had shifted, and pretending otherwise endangered cohesion more than acknowledging uncomfortable truths within respectful boundaries. Eisenhower recognized Patton's resignation would resonate publicly. Newspapers idolized him. Soldiers revered him. Losing Patton would signal dysfunction at the highest level, undermining morale across fronts. Such symbolism mattered immensely in wartime, where belief sustained endurance as surely as logistics sustained movement. Thus, Patton's ultimatum became a weapon wielded deliberately, pressing Eisenhower toward decision. It narrowed options brutally, collapsing diplomatic fog into stark alternatives. Either American commanders retained authority over American armies, or the alliance risked implosion. Patton forced clarity, knowing restraint no longer served victory or honor. Montgomery responded to resistance with calm persistence, presenting his position as rational necessity rather than ambition. He believed northern operations required unity of command. Temporary control had worked, therefore permanence followed logically. In his view, battlefield success validated authority, and hesitation threatened momentum when Germany still resisted fiercely despite obvious strategic decline. He argued the Battle of the Bulge proved his methods superior, citing stabilized lines and restored coherence. Montgomery framed American difficulties as symptoms of overextension, not incompetence. British discipline, he claimed, imposed order where chaos briefly reigned. Such language avoided insult directly, yet implied dependence, deepening American resentment already simmering dangerously. Montgomery's headquarters produced memoranda stressing efficiency, logistics, and concentration. Broad front strategy diluted power, he argued, while decisive thrusts demanded centralized control. His vision required massed forces, and British formations alone lacked depth. American armies therefore became indispensable components, not partners within what he described as an integrated northern design. He insisted nationality should dissolve beneath coalition necessity. Soldiers fought for victory, not flags. Command structures must reflect geography and operational logic, not sentiment. To Montgomery, objections sounded parochial, even childish. War demanded hard choices. Pride had no place when Germany could still prolong bloodshed through stubborn, localized resistance. Privately, Montgomery believed American generals overestimated their independence. He viewed Eisenhower as political referee rather than strategist, useful but malleable. Montgomery's confidence bordered on certainty that persistence would prevail. He had waited years for such leverage. Now, with armies under his command, relinquishing them felt like retreat. Montgomery underestimated emotional dimensions entirely. He misread American anger as temporary noise rather than existential affront. His press conference apology felt sufficient to him. Words were spoken, regret expressed. Operational reality should resume unaffected. He failed to grasp how deeply honor and recognition shaped American military culture. In meetings, Montgomery remained unyielding, repeating arguments patiently. He framed compromise as inefficiency. Returning armies mid-campaign disrupted planning, confused logistics, and diluted responsibility. If something failed later, blame would scatter. Permanent command offered clarity. Success or failure would rest squarely on his shoulders. Montgomery also invoked British exhaustion frankly. 5 years of war had drained manpower and material. American abundance offset British depletion. Alliance fairness demanded shared burdens. In his calculus, command balanced sacrifice. Britain had borne early losses alone. Now America should support Britain's final strategic vision. He believed history would vindicate him. Critics, he assumed, lacked perspective. Once the Ruhr fell and Germany collapsed, complaints would vanish. Victors forgave methods they once questioned. Montgomery imagined future historians praising his insistence, portraying resistance as petty politics overshadowed by eventual triumph. Montgomery's certainty hardened American opposition further. Bradley interpreted the stance as contempt. Patton saw manipulation. Eisenhower saw disaster looming. Montgomery, however, perceived principled firmness. He refused to yield ground preemptively. To him, conceding armies meant admitting error, something his temperament resisted instinctively. Churchill's silence initially reinforced Montgomery's resolve. British leadership had long supported concentrated thrusts. Montgomery assumed political backing would materialize eventually. Eisenhower, he believed, lacked alternative once operational realities asserted themselves. Time, Montgomery thought, worked in his favor, not against him. Thus Montgomery pushed back relentlessly, convinced logic would prevail. He misjudged alliance fragility and personal limits. His demand for permanent control crystallized the crisis fully. No ambiguity remained. Eisenhower now faced an unavoidable choice, with unity, authority, and trust hanging precariously in balance. Eisenhower studied reports quietly, weighing battlefield momentum against alliance cohesion while understanding command decisions could fracture trust permanently. Victory demanded speed and concentration, yet unity required restraint because egos, histories, and national pride pressed relentlessly forward. He recognized arithmetic without numbers. Balancing personalities and armies, knowing subtraction anywhere risked catastrophic collapse across Allied fronts. Maps covered Eisenhower's table. Yet faces mattered more because Bradley's resolve and Patton's fury threatened resignation openly publicly. Across the channel, Churchill watched anxiously, fearing American withdrawal from shared purpose more than German resistance remaining anywhere. Eisenhower's math allowed no elegance. Every outcome carried costs measured in morale, credibility, and lives across multiple commands. Granting Montgomery permanence promised efficiency, but it risked mutiny among Americans who felt belittled during recent sacrifices remembered. Denying him outright preserved pride, yet threatened British confidence and Churchill's political standing within wartime coalition leadership circles. Eisenhower sought a remainder after division, something survivable once anger subsided among commanders, soldiers, governments alike later on. He recalled coalition lessons painfully learned, from North Africa to Normandy, where compromise sustained progress under immense strain. Eisenhower believed authority flowed from consent, not merely rank or seniority within multinational commands during prolonged warfare periods. Losing either side endangered campaigns ahead, especially Rhine crossings and final drives eastward against collapsing German defenses everywhere. Bradley's ultimatum weighed heavily, because armies without trust disintegrate regardless of orders during intense operational pressure moments everywhere. Patton's threat amplified stakes, turning personal rivalry into institutional peril for American leadership, cohesion, morale, credibility, worldwide allies. Eisenhower calculated which wound healed faster, bruised pride or broken alliance between wartime partners facing common enemy together. Operational charts suggested momentum favored boldness, but politics demanded caution simultaneously across Allied councils, capitals, press rooms, audiences everywhere. Eisenhower understood headlines could wound armies, just as shells did through morale erosion, misunderstanding, recrimination, bitterness, division. Cycles. Unity therefore became a weapon, fragile yet decisive when wielded carefully by patient leadership amid crisis pressures mounting. He sketched a compromise internally, returning most forces while preserving British relevance within Northern operations planning structures temporarily. Such arithmetic satisfied none fully, yet prevented catastrophic subtraction from coalition. Strength, unity, credibility, command, coherence, stability overall. Eisenhower accepted resentment as cost, preferring anger over abandonment of shared purpose, victory, timing, allied legitimacy, solidarity, trust. He prepared to act swiftly, knowing delay magnified pressure from commanders, politicians, journalists, soldiers, families, publics, allies abroad. Orders would speak plainly, restoring boundaries without humiliating Britain publicly while preserving dignity, partnership, continuity, legitimacy, trust, stability. Eisenhower hoped clarity cooled tempers, allowing focus to return forward toward defeating Germany quickly, decisively together as allies. He weighed legacy reluctantly. Understanding historians would parse motives later amid documents, memoirs, controversies, interpretations, debates, archives endlessly. For now, survival mattered of armies and alliance alike within grinding winter campaigns supply. Constraints, exhaustion, uncertainty everywhere. Eisenhower chose balance, not brilliance, to carry victory home through disciplined compromise, shared sacrifice, command, patience, resolve, unity. The decision framed leadership as subtraction management, minimizing losses while advancing objectives across coalition warfare, complexity, constraints. Realities. Eisenhower accepted solitude because consensus rarely accompanies necessary judgment during wartime command crises involving allies, egos, stakes, lives. His impossible math concluded quietly, with orders reshaping command lines across northern fronts immediately, decisively, pragmatically, firmly onward. Reactions would follow predictably: relief, anger, suspicion, and resolve among generals, staffs, troops, governments, newspapers, publics, allies worldwide. Eisenhower braced for criticism, trusting results to justify pain endured by leaders, soldiers, families, nations. Coalitions, histories together. Unity preserved momentum, and momentum shortened war by sustaining cooperation, logistics, command, clarity, trust, morale, pressure, initiative, speed. Thus Eisenhower solved the equation imperfectly, choosing survivable outcomes amid conflicting demands, rivalries, expectations, alliances, responsibilities, burdens, stakes. Victory would arrive sooner through unity, not through personal vindication sought by commanders, nations, press, politics, pride alone. The war required math without applause, only endurance from leaders balancing power, humility, compromise, responsibility, patience, foresight, unity. Eisenhower issued orders with deliberate speed, removing American armies while preserving operational continuity across the northern front. The compromise returned First Army southward, while Ninth Army remained temporarily attached for the Rhine operation only. This subtraction avoided rupture, maintaining coalition momentum without humiliating British command outright. The decision balanced pride, power, and survival carefully. Bradley regained command authority swiftly, calming American headquarters where resignation threats had grown dangerously credible. The return of First Army restored hierarchy, reassured staff officers, and signaled respect for American sacrifices during Ardennes fighting. Morale steadied quickly, because soldiers recognized familiar leadership and national accountability restored. Trust began repairing slowly, though resentment lingered quietly. Montgomery received the decision coldly, understanding the reduction represented political defeat rather than operational judgment alone. Keeping Ninth Army preserved his relevance, yet stripped ambitions of permanent authority over American manpower. The compromise constrained future plans, forcing British strategy to coexist with Allied sensitivities carefully. Pride remained bruised, but cooperation continued outwardly intact. Churchill accepted the outcome pragmatically, recognizing alliance preservation outweighed bruised prestige during war's final phase. Publicly he supported Eisenhower, while privately managing Montgomery's frustration through political reassurance and restraint. British influence survived diminished, yet sufficient for participation in decisive Rhine operations. This balance kept London aligned, avoiding deeper transatlantic fractures emerging publicly then. Orders moved quickly through headquarters, redrawing command lines without dramatic ceremony or public explanation. Speed mattered, because delay risked renewed argument and media escalation across Allied capitals. Clarity prevented confusion, ensuring units transitioned smoothly despite winter conditions and combat fatigue. Staff officers enforced changes quietly, minimizing friction, resentment, rumors, speculation. Ninth Army remained under Montgomery briefly, assigned specifically to the forthcoming Rhine crossing operation. Its presence provided manpower reassurance, artillery depth, and logistical mass necessary for northern success. Yet boundaries were explicit, preventing expansion of authority beyond agreed limits. Everyone understood the clock was running, not paused indefinitely. Temporary meant temporary, a lesson stressed repeatedly firmly. American soldiers noticed little immediate change, because frontline priorities remained survival and advance. However, senior commanders felt relief, knowing representation and recognition were restored institutionally. The compromise reassured families, newspapers, and veterans organizations watching closely. It also signaled respect for sacrifices, calming anger lingering after Bulge fighting losses. Trust rebuilt incrementally, not dramatically overnight. Montgomery's strategic vision narrowed consequently, focusing on achievable objectives within coalition constraints. He adjusted rhetoric, avoiding public claims that might reopen wounds among American allies. Operational discipline replaced ambition, at least outwardly, as final campaigns approached. The compromise enforced humility, a scarce commodity during victory's approach. Survival of alliance mattered more than individual legacies then. Eisenhower monitored reactions carefully, prepared to intervene again if tensions resurfaced unexpectedly. He understood compromise required maintenance, not assumption, within volatile personalities. His authority rested on balance, not dominance. During coalition warfare, this moment tested leadership, demanding patience, restraint, and foresight simultaneously. Eisenhower accepted burden, absorbing criticism quietly to protect unity. The transfer of armies proceeded smoothly, disproving fears of administrative chaos. Logistics adjusted quickly, command staffs coordinated, and operations continued without pause. German resistance remained primary focus, not allied politics along active fronts. Soldiers advanced forward, largely unaware of headquarters drama resolved above. Effectiveness validated Eisenhower's arithmetic, preventing collapse feared earlier. Strategically, the compromise preserved tempo, enabling Rhine preparations without alliance distraction. Neither side achieved full satisfaction, yet both avoided catastrophic rupture. Such imperfect solutions defined coalition success throughout the war. Balance mattered more than pride, especially during final offensives ahead. Eisenhower's decision reflected realism, not weakness. Under pressure. Results would justify pain later historically. Stripping 300,000 soldiers tested alliances, yet avoided collapse through disciplined compromise. The armies returned, tempers cooled, and command clarity re-emerged gradually. Victory required such sacrifices, not only in blood but authority. Eisenhower proved leadership meant subtraction sometimes to preserve everything else. The war moved forward, alliance intact, toward inevitable conclusion. Eisenhower understood that commanding an alliance was not only a test of strategy but also a careful negotiation of egos across national lines, where each decision risked fracturing decades of cooperation. Every action required consideration of pride, political consequence, and battlefield necessity simultaneously, forcing him to balance authority against diplomacy with unparalleled subtlety and foresight. Montgomery's insistence on permanent control over American armies represented more than ambition. It threatened to destabilize command hierarchies and create a precedent where national prestige could override military pragmatism. Eisenhower recognized that unchecked ego could derail operations entirely, and swift action was essential to prevent cascading failures across the Western Front, especially in the context of ongoing offensives in Germany. By temporarily removing First Army from Montgomery's control while allowing Ninth Army to remain attached, Eisenhower achieved a delicate compromise that preserved coalition cohesion without undermining operational objectives, demonstrating that the art of command often requires subtraction, negotiation, and careful calibration of authority rather than brute enforcement of rank or personal preference. American generals, particularly Bradley and Patton, recognized the decision as a vindication of their loyalty and competence, restoring confidence in their ability to lead independently while maintaining respect for British contributions, ensuring that personal resentments did not escalate into resignations or active refusals to execute orders during critical operations. Montgomery faced humiliation, yet his prestige remained sufficient to maintain morale among British and Canadian forces, demonstrating that effective compromise often preserves enough pride to prevent complete alienation, even when leaders are forced to accept limitations on ambitions, which in coalition warfare is as crucial as tactical victory on the battlefield itself. Churchill's intervention, endorsing Eisenhower's compromise publicly and acknowledging American contributions, helped mitigate political backlash, reinforcing the alliance in the eyes of domestic audiences and international observers. It was a reminder that public perception and alliance optics are as critical as battlefield maneuvers, particularly when dealing with leaders who cultivate their own media narratives aggressively. The transfer of authority proceeded methodically, with operational orders communicated clearly to prevent confusion, ensuring that units remained effective and prepared while command structures were realigned. Logistics, supply chains, and artillery coordination continued uninterrupted, demonstrating that meticulous planning and foresight can prevent bureaucratic turbulence from compromising tactical readiness in coalition contexts. Eisenhower monitored Montgomery's reactions closely, prepared to enforce limits if overreach occurred again, reflecting the necessity of continuous oversight when personal ambition collides with coalition objectives. Leadership at this level is sustained not only by issuing orders, but by anticipating potential breaches of protocol and addressing them preemptively. The compromise restored operational tempo, allowing American and British forces to conduct Rhine crossings and subsequent advances without internal friction, proving that alliance survival often depends on timely, sometimes unpopular decisions that prioritize collective outcomes over individual aggrandizement or temporary political gains. Soldiers in the field, largely unaware of the political intricacies, benefited directly as command clarity returned. Confidence in leadership stabilized morale, reduced hesitation in executing maneuvers, and reinforced trust between national contingents, illustrating that strategic compromises at the top propagate tangible advantages to frontline units when managed carefully. Eisenhower's ability to navigate egos while maintaining coalition cohesion exemplifies the hidden labor of command, where victories are secured as much by managing personalities as by maneuvering troops. In this instance, leadership required balancing pride, authority, and operational necessity to preserve the alliance that would ultimately deliver victory in Europe. Ultimately, the survival of the alliance during the Ego War demonstrated that command is measured not solely in victories on the battlefield, but in the preservation of relationships, trust, and collective purpose. Eisenhower's decisions exemplified strategic patience, political acumen, and the enduring principle that unity among allies is as valuable as any territorial gain in wartime.